What happens at Grandma's stays at Grandma's is a model for you and your grandkids. If it's fun, it's fair game. But lately, hip pain has you grimacing more than laughing. And that's the moment you realize life's too short to put off treatment any longer.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for orthopedic care, with hundreds of joint replacements each year. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better. The Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. And this is an In Case You Missed It episode. This came out in January of 2020. I bring that up because this is before COVID. But this is a great conversation about burnout, which I think that we're all feeling right now for different reasons than when we recorded this, but still a great conversation about burnout that I wanted you to hear in case you missed it or if you're brand new here. So here we go. Episode 617, in case you missed it, Recognizing Burnout with Dr. Ashley Solomon.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This podcast. I am Amanda Valentine, returning guest, Dr. Ashley. Yeah, that's how you say your name. I'm not going to edit that out.
Heck no.
Dr. Ashley Solomon, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, so I know, so excited to talk to you. So you were part of my tween week, and we talked about binge eating, which is such a popular episode because I feel like we could do multiple episodes on binge eating.
Yeah, we should. We should. There's a lot to it, and it affects a lot of people.
And so give me your credentials. What do you do?
Okay. Yeah. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a practice here in Cincinnati called Gallia Collaborative, and we really focus on supporting women to elevate their impact through supporting their mental wellness and mental health. So we do that through psychotherapy, coaching, and offering lots of resources.
Awesome. And so this is such a big topic, I feel like. And I feel like I've talked about it a lot just in my own way. I mean, I am not a professional, you are. So I'm very excited to talk to you about burnout because I feel like, and we were just talking before we started recording that in today's world, in our society, like we are almost in a burnout culture of just like everything is go, go, go. And so how do you know if you're actually like burnt out or if you're, I don't know, you're just being lazy? I don't know.
I'm so glad you went there, actually, because there's been some interesting stuff out there lately, some kind of new research that we're actually recognizing that the whole concept of laziness, like, actually doesn't exist. Neurobiologically, all right, I'm going to go on my nerd train for a second. So in terms of our neurobiology, there's actually no way for human beings to truly be what we define as lazy. So we're always, and this is helpful to me just as an individual, we are always motivated by something. From a brain standpoint, we're always motivated by something that just might be competing with what we think we should be doing. So if we are, for example, calling ourselves lazy because we just can't make it to, the early workout class that we had committed to doing, it's not necessarily that we're lazy or we're unmotivated for that thing. We're just more motivated by the need for sleep or rest or connection or something else. So it's actually been a really helpful kind of concept for me and for a lot of people that I work with to, instead of thinking about kind of taking this very shame-based approach of why can't I just like get it together, thinking about what is pulling my attention and what actually is motivating me. But I guess when it comes to burnout, I think that becomes really relevant because if we're persistently feeling this kind of lack of energy for the things that we want to be doing, whether that's, work or our physical health or whatever it might be, something that especially that we've been maybe in the past able to spend a lot of our energy on, but suddenly we're just not, instead of getting into this kind of shame spiral about like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I keep it up? Really kind of thinking about what am I being pulled towards? And oftentimes it is things like our brain and our body are telling us like, you need a break or you need rest. You need more connection in your life. Like we need things that don't necessarily feel compatible with that thing that we've been like striving and grinding on. So a lot of people talk about physical symptoms that end up being signs of burnout, like persistent headaches, those like anxious feelings of like your heart consistently racing, shortness of breath, fatigue, like muscle aches. So we know that stress and burnout definitely have a major impact on our body physically.
Yeah.
And then the other big things are like lack or loss of interest in things that used to like give us a lot of energy and really sort of support our well-being. Lacking that passion, getting really irritable with people, feeling like you have a short fuse, just feeling that lack of energy and enthusiasm. So a lot of people when they're experiencing burnout say they just don't feel like themselves anymore.
Yeah. I say that I've definitely felt that way the past several months. Like at what point are you just stressed out and where does it go into a burnout phase? Whenever it's like chronic, when it's happening all the time? So in a clinical sense, we kind of distinguish stress from burnout. Yes, one based on the idea that burnout's usually a prolonged period of time. So it's become more of a chronic issue where you don't feel like you're sort of going through the typical ups and downs of, feeling higher levels of stress, lower levels of stress. Like this is more persistent. And when we think about it, like the actual definition of burnout, most of the research has been burnout related to job stress. So it was originally, when people started studying burnout, they were looking at it in people in healthcare professions, people that like are constantly like serving other people. Mm-hmm. That's where it really started to take shape as a concept. And I think that is, it's not necessarily that it has to be related to a particular job, but I think what's important there is that it's the type of stress that often comes from trying to meet so many other people's demands. Yeah. And that can be, certainly as a mom or in lots of different roles that we have, even outside of a traditional like work setting, just trying to sort of meet so many different expectations and be so many things to different people. That's sort of the unique flavor of burnout in particular, as opposed to like, the ups and downs of stress that we all experience. So like, and I'll ask you this because I'll tell you kind of where I was at, where I felt like even in the past couple months, and I brought this up before we started recording, like I almost felt like I was dipping my toes into depression because it got, you could tell me if I'm wrong because I don't really know. And then you do Google searches and you can get a million different answers and I'm not the expert, but I'd say for the burnout, it was a lot of the things that I really love that I just felt like why don't, like just even just exercising and how much I love going to the gym. And it almost felt like flavorless. It's like I'm still eating something, but I don't taste it anymore. And so it was like stuff like that. And then I feel like there was like a lot of expectations. And plus I was working a lot. I have a hard time saying no. And so doing a lot of things and feeling a lot of pressure that I put on myself. And for me, the point, because the past several months have been extremely difficult for me for multiple different reasons. That's where I kind of felt like this kind of next leveled, where I was feeling all of that and it felt like times 10. And there was like certain days where like my husband was like legitimately scared because I would just be like sitting in the living room and just be like staring. And like I would just cry. I was just crying and staring. And my husband's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I can't even tell you why I'm crying. And it just felt like everything was gray. It's like, it feels like I know I'm in this cloud and I don't know how to get out of it. And, like, well, let me try pouring some coffee on it. Maybe that will zip me up. And it doesn't work. And just like nothing works. And it's like, even I'm such an emotional eater and binge eater. And I've talked to you about that before. Like there's just nothing that fills this like dark hole. And it's just like, there's just nothing I could do, but just stare off into space and just nothing was making me happy. Nothing gives me like those highs. It was just Like it was just sad. And I'm like, this is not me. This is so far from me. And then having a job and being where, just my unique position where I'm at of like, I've been an entertainer has been my job of like, but you need to snap it on and you need to have a smile and you need to be funny and you need to be silly. And and it's just, but in those moments where it's not like the light switch turned off, it was just like, oh my God, what is this? Like, what's that?
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry you experienced that. That's a really awful, dark place to be. I mean, I've certainly had those periods in my life, so I know how just like soul crushing it can feel, and trying to conceptualize what this is and then how do I get out of it, because you don't. I always think with depression in particular, the worst thing about depression is that you so recognize that this is a horrible place to be, but you don't have the energy often the energy to like get yourself or climb out of it. Yeah. And that's kind of the paradox of depression that makes it so awful. And I think that like what you were describing with like all of these stressors kind of coalescing at the same time and kind of coming down on you, and had been, you've spent so much of your career, like we've talked about, in, like I was saying, a very people-oriented, role where you're just constantly kind of giving of yourself. And as much as I, getting to know you, I know that you are, you're a great entertainer, so you're able to a degree to sort of turn it on and off. I mean, you're also a human being. And so that has to come, like there has to be a well for you to be able to, just have that ability to express yourself. So I think a lot of people get to the point, I think that's the natural progression with burnout, is that it often inevitably leads to a state of depression. And the difference, I would say, is that, we can exist in periods of burnout for, some amount of time. But at some point, we really do have neurological changes that are happening, and, neurotransmitter changes and things like that happen as a result of kind of being in that state for so long. And that's where people often start to experience just that kind of sense of like hopelessness or helplessness, that more profound sense of like nothing is really giving me joy, or like people often describe it as I just don't feel like life has much color. Like I can get myself to go through the motions, but there's just no like color around it. I know in my own experience, when I was kind of in the thick of burnout a few years ago, and probably depression, like ticked it off for me is that I love music so much. I'm not musical in any way, but just listening to it and just like experiencing the emotion of it. And I would just like listen to song after song and just like feel nothing. Yeah. I feel like that was like my sign, like this is not right. You know, this is not me, like you said. And that's where I really hope that people who experience that either have the ability to recognize it in themselves and can reach out for support, because at that point you can't do it completely alone, or have somebody in their life who's kind of insightful enough to be like, you're not okay, like something has to give, something has to change, like the status quo just is not an option.
So how do you start digging out of that? Yeah. I'm asking for me.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I think that, I think we love to hear the stories about, you obviously just went through this like major life transition, like beautiful change. I think we love to hear those stories, and they are really powerful. I know they've been really powerful for me in the past when I've been in like places where like spaces or seasons of my life where I just felt like very trapped in what like the status quo and what was happening. And I also like to remind people that, you don't have to make a whole life overhaul to get started. And maybe that will be necessary, but often when you're starting to just recognize the signs of burnout in yourself, you don't have the energy for that yet. So there's like this interim step where you maybe wish that things were completely different, but you feel kind of stuck in the fact that like, I feel so helpless and maybe even like cynical and skeptical and all of these things that I can't imagine like really turning things around. So I think when people are in that place, it's often starting with baby steps, which is, maybe a little bit cliche, but there's a reason for it because they're so powerful. I think of the idea of like small wins, lead to bigger wins. And so kind of stringing things together. And so for a lot of people, I think that is starting with just talking about it. It sounds, in the way I just said it sounds easier said than done.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to take all of those things and form it into the way you want to express it. You know what I mean? It feels like it's hard to understand. In your own head, it feels like other people aren't going to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they're just gonna be like, oh, just get it together. Like,
right.
What's your problem?
Right.
You know what I mean? I think it's also that fear of somebody judging you.
I think too that often the people closest to us in our lives are, I hope this makes sense, are so invested in us being a certain way or a certain version of ourselves that it's hard for them when we are not able or capable of being that version of ourselves. And, whether we've kind of slipped into a depression or experiencing burnout or whatever, they may come back with a lot of that. Like, you need to get it together. We need to, you need to figure this out because I need you to be, they might not say this, but because I need you to be productive, if it's, your manager at work or, the spouse or partner, that I need you to be or able to show up for our kids in the right way. And, there can feel like there's just not a lot of space for, being able to, that they might not get it and not a lot of space sort of like based on the relationship to even have anywhere to go with it.
So that's when you reach out to a professional?
Yes. I think, and I think friends can be great. And I think that there's something really profoundly helpful about connecting with other people that have been through similar things, oftentimes particularly like if work or parenthood, or there's kind of a particular area where you're feeling really burned out, people who have experience with that. And I would always recommend at least considering reaching out to a professional who can at least sort of help you think about and assess like where on the spectrum you are, because everything exists on a spectrum. And if we think of, burnout being at one side of it and, really significant depression and hopelessness being, at the more extreme side of it, where it can kind of progress to, it's important to know where you are because that's going to determine what kind of intervention might be needed. Is it, might you actually need medication to help you be able to think more clearly and to have the energy to make some of the changes, for example, that you need to make in your day-to-day life. People talk about, all the bubble baths and, sort of commercial self-care stuff. Yeah. And that may be great if you're sort of at the very, very mild end of the spectrum, and at the more significant end, or if this has been going on for a long time, you might feel like, I don't have the energy to like turn on the bath. So figuring out where you are and what's actually going to be helpful and meaningful to you is kind of the first step, and then making a plan.
Yeah. And then I think probably incorporating more of that, right? Like, I feel like for me, I think taking, long luxurious showers are nice or whatever, but it's like that. I know for me, something that makes me feel like that at least recharges me, because I do feel like, or I have felt like, at least in the past several months, like definitely like my battery is 0 and I can get it charged to like 2% to function. But like the things that recharge my batteries, which is hard because it's stepping away from me, it is just like quiet time. It is like, that is just the deep introvert in me of like, I just want to be by myself. Let me go for a long walk in the woods. I am by myself. I just want to be alone. And it feels like you get like the small little tastes of it. And it's like, okay, you can do it for a day or a weekend. And it's like, it charges you a little bit, and then, but nothing like, like, how do you get it back up to at least like 50% or like, where you're out of the yellow? It just feels like, well, oh my God, what am I going to have to do? Like take 6 months off and just like lay in bed to get fully charged again? Like that. I mean, that's how do you even, how do you find that space where you can actually get it charged up and it's not just teeny bites at a time?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The battery analogy. I like that. I was just talking to somebody the other day about this idea of like understanding our natural flow and energy. I mean, which is really based on kind of our temperament, and that we're born with. We're not going to change. Like you being an introvert by nature is not going to change. That's a core part of who you are. So how you recharge isn't going to change, and you can develop kind of awareness of what you need over time. And we were talking about the fact that, you can sort of swim against the current of your own patterns for so long. Like, you can kind of put yourself out there and keep kind of fighting against, the systems and the things that sort of stand in your way. But that, I mean, at some point, of course, we get tired and we need to take a break from that. And so just when you were talking about, your natural introversion, I'm just thinking about like your work and lifestyle, which, demands that you're really, present and engaged with people, and knowing that about yourself and how that can impact on your energy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really love that, but it also it just drains me. And then it's like, well, I don't give myself the space to have that alone time. I know I need it, but I also really love the other part of it too. So it's like I'm making that choice, and I feel like so many other people, and maybe not even to this specific example of like, some things that make you feel better, but yet you still just like don't do it. Right. And then you get frustrated with yourself where I'm like, I know that if I just like took a couple days off, like you're supposed to. That's what a weekend is supposed to be. You're supposed to relax. You're not supposed to just like, okay, now how many chores can I get done and how can I give myself more work to do, which is exactly what I do constantly. Of like, I know the solution, or even just like on a weight loss journey or whatever. Like I know eating these foods will give me the result I want. Like why won't I just do it already? Like what is it that's part of how we're built that does that? Yeah, I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, that might go back in a sense to where we started with talking about just like competing motivations. And I think like part of it is like bringing curiosity to that question, of like, what is so resistant in me to taking the time that I need to recharge, for example. And what is it that I might be kind of pushing back against, or that would give me? And I mean, to get a little bit deeper here, I think oftentimes, it's things related to, okay, so much of my identity is tied up in the idea of how much I can produce or how I can show up for other people. And so if I let that down a little bit, does that not only, make me worry about what I've accomplished or the way that people think about me, but just sort of losing my sense of worthiness. Yeah. Like really kind of getting curious about like, what am I pushing back against? Rather than, again, kind of getting in that cycle of, which is easy to do, feeling really shameful about the thing itself, like that I'm not doing this. So what is it that's pulling me towards like eating these other foods that on the surface seem like, but maybe I'm really in need of comfort right now. And that's why I'm drawn to this, you know, really being able to sort of ask yourself those questions is helpful when you can do it in a really non-judgmental, more kind of neutral way. And then we were talking about a little bit before we started that, and you mentioned that kind of sense of burnout culture. I think that when people talk about this topic, it's so often that we're talking about like, what can we as individuals do? Like, how do we recharge? How do we work 80 hours a week? And then I need to use the weekends to recharge, but I'm not doing it. Yeah. And sometimes we're asking ourselves the wrong questions. Like, why am I so, all right, I work 80 hours a week. Why am I so tired? I need to like, do I need to up my workouts, or do I need to like, is it what I'm eating? And not thinking about why are we working 80 hours a week, and what is the sort of bigger system that is like enabling or facilitating that? Like, where does that drive come from as a kind of culture, society that like to be successful, that's what we have to put in, you know? So there are these, it's not as popular to talk about because they're systems that are much harder to change than our like individual behavior. But it's also really, I think it can be really important and validating to recognize how that influences what we're doing as well.
Yeah, because it's just, and it's so funny because it's not like that anybody ever specifically says any of that to you. It's just like the vibe. It just exists. And it's like this unsaid pressure that is just always around you. It feels, at least, you know, I feel it. Everybody that I know personally feels it, and it's just draining. And it's like, it's like nobody knows how to fully step away from it. And then if you do for some reason, then people start trashing you of like, who she thinks she is, you know what I mean? And then you got to deal with that, which is a whole nother stressor. It's like, oh my God, the cycle continues.
I'm thinking about like Instagram, which we're both on, and just even like that people create these beautiful posts of their relaxation, you know, like their like self-care Sunday stuff, but somehow it's this like perfectly, you know, manicured post about how they're just like, you know, luxuriating on the Sunday. And I'm like, that's not congruent. But it's also, it's like so, it can be so subtle that you don't even realize how it's influencing us in terms of like culture, and that person's really like investing a lot of energy and time. Well, and I feel like too, just even, you know, getting in the mindset, say you're like scrolling through Instagram and you see that and you see like, oh, here's the perfect bath with all these candles and there's plants and there's a view of the ocean behind the window. It's like, well, if I only had that, then I could finally relax. Right.
You know,
if
it's like almost, it's almost like this image of like, that's what relaxation is. And I don't have it. So I don't get to relax until I go to Bali and hang out at that in that bathtub. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, even again, that's not said. It's just this undercurrent of everything that you just consume of like, well, it's I don't have that, so that's why I'm not relaxed.
Yeah. I think about that with a few years ago. I think, like I was mentioning, I was probably in this kind of burnout season, and I scheduled a retreat for myself at Kripalu, which is an amazing retreat center up east, and it was great, and I'm so glad that I did it. And for a lot of reasons, there's lots of like yoga and just discussion and just time to like clear my head and, you know, be away and all of that good stuff. And I also think that a lot of that's kind of incomplete if it's not helping us do that like in our regular lives, because now I just like fantasize all the time about being back there. And like, if I could, maybe that's what I need to schedule like another trip, which would be great. And like, I can't always live for the weekend or the trip or the like opportunity to find like 2 days of space. Like, how do I savor like a, you know, smaller chunk of space?
Well, even that of just even, you know, because I just went to Asheville, North Carolina. You gave me the advice from switching from job to job to give yourself some time, which I should have given myself more. But I need to do that moving forward. But I mean, I'm not knocking going to Asheville, but I really wanted to go because I'd never been before. I love being in the mountains. I like doing trips by myself. That is, you know, recharges my battery for me. But then the whole time I'm like mad at myself because I'm like, you're spending this money. You don't have a steady paycheck coming in. This is irresponsible. Like, you know, so it's like trying to enjoy myself, but still nagging myself of like, this is frivolous. Like, should you be spending this money right now? What if something happens and you didn't have this money because you blew it on this trip? And it's like, you know, it's like, well, God, I was supposed to be relaxed and I was supposed to be beating myself up over my relaxation. But I feel like people do that too, where it's like, or almost like, okay, I'm going to take a vacation. I'm going to go hang on the beach for a week. And then you go, and then it's like, if you're not living up to these expectations and I'm supposed to be relaxing, how come not? It's like you turn in this constant cycle of like beating yourself up over the thing that you're supposed to be relaxing through. Like, like, oh my, I mean, you have to, that's not just me, right?
Not just you, for sure. I mean, I think I call what you're describing like that inner critic and even just like inner skeptic, that's like really fearful and, is coming from a very fear-based place. And that's, it's not that is wrong, but it can, it's just like our not our deepest fears, but a lot of, actually it's more of like the surface level fears, just sort of like rehashed over and over in our head that doesn't allow us to just like fully let go.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think that what I find really helpful and one of the things I know is really helpful is actually like more kind of body-based stuff. So instead of like fighting with our brains, like why is my inner critic so loud, is actually like trying to get more connected with what's going on in our bodies that allows some of that stress. Because stress is something that just exists in the body, of course, at different degrees. And when we've been chronically stressed, then our body's just holding all of this tension. And so like things that we can do to get connected with our body in a way that really releases that, I think can sometimes like quiet that voice a little bit. Mm-hmm. There's this like, and I guess I want to clarify and say that when I talk about like getting in our bodies, that doesn't necessarily mean like going on a long run. Like there's, a lot of research to show that things like doing, like engaging in a hug for more than 10 seconds, so at least 10 seconds, hugging someone has like huge stress reduction effects because our body is releasing all these like feel good hormones. Has to be more than 10 seconds. So it can't be like the 3-second, like, hey.
Isn't that what the weighted blanket's supposed to do?
Yeah, the weighted blanket. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I just got one for Christmas. So it's like
I did
hug.
too.
Yeah. So sensory things like that, that helps us just even like physically get into a state where we're not holding so much tension. That can also help kind of like slow our brain down.
Yeah.
A lot.
I feel like too, and tell me your vibes on this of just even doing too much. Like I'm just gonna use myself as an example. Yeah. Because I feel like we can safely say I've been going through burnout, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think so. Yeah.
Then it's just like, so that you have like, so you're burnout on these other things. And then you're just like, well, how come like, well, I want my food to be a certain way or my exercise. Mm-hmm. And then like all of these other pieces that you add this additional stress to because it's like, well, okay, let's say my job is stressing me out, and because you're in this state that's like, well, how come I'm not firing on all cylinders on where I want to be with my workouts or where I want to be with my sleep or with your food, or that's the examples I'm using because that's what affects me of like, then I just stress out about that of like, I know I got this, like, I understand it. Like, how come it just feels like the puzzle pieces are just like not fitting together the way they're supposed to? Is it kind of a domino effect of like one thing affects you and it just kind of like spreads?
I think what you're describing is like totally like textbook burnout progression. Exactly. And I think so there's 3 kind of core characteristics to burnout that have been kind of defined by the research in this area. They find like over and over and over again. So one is like a sense of emotional exhaustion. And so that can be everything from just is like feeling literally like fatigued and like I just don't have the energy to like put into this thing anymore. The second is kind of more interpersonal. So it's like feeling really like skeptical, kind of like, and that often shows up as like irritability and being really cynical about things, even the idea that like things could get better. And then the last one is about feeling really ineffective. And sometimes it happens like in that progression. And so I don't know if this is exactly what you were describing, but I just think that like, it's like often the ineffectiveness part that really like spreads to different areas of your life in my experience, where it just then feels like, I can't do anything right and nothing's like going my way. And I just feel like no matter what I do, it's not quite good enough. And that's where it like trickles into, if it starts from like, work burnout, it goes to parenting or to like, just other roles that you might play. And and really, has a pretty significant impact then on like your life as a whole instead of just like that one area.
So you've been through burnout. How did you kind of climb out of it?
Yeah. So I'd say the most recent period of burnout I had was maybe a year and a half ago. And I think, I've shared a little bit of this with you because I feel like there's some similarities in our kind of journeys to starting something new as a result of that and trying to like create a life that felt just kind of more in line with like what I was most passionate about. But long before I could get there, when I was kind of in the depths of that, I did take a vacation. And I feel like that, sounds a little cliche, but I think really intentionally on this trip, I like tuned out the world as much as possible. And usually even on like, in a vacation situation, I would be very like scheduled about everything that we do. And, I've got 4 kids, so you sort of have to be to some degree, but, just trying to, make every minute sort of count. But honestly, I was just so depleted at that point. Like I couldn't do my normal like obsessive planning stuff. And it turned out to be great because it was like enough time to do some of this reflection that we're talking about, where I was like, all right, I need to talk to a therapist, and a big thing I did, I think, was connect with other people who I sensed, even if I didn't know, might have had similar experiences, like been down the road that I had been to. And, as a psychologist, I feel like I'm decent at like getting things out of people. Yeah. So I would like schedule a coffee with them and, just try to hear a little bit more about like their journey and what made them like make different decisions. And then I would say the other thing was more about like trying to mentally approach things differently. I'm definitely a person, which is why I can relate to a lot of like people I work with, that puts a lot of myself and my, and my worth can get really tied up in like what I'm doing, not like who I'm being. And so I tried to be really like conscious of when that was showing up for me and how much I had kind of put aspects of my identity or so much of my identity in like how much I could do and sort of be for other people. And I didn't necessarily stop doing that, but because I think that that's probably for me more of a lifetime journey, but just that like consciousness building of like when I'd be in a moment of like about to say yes, because it just felt like what I was supposed to do rather than like checking in with myself about like, is there any part of me that actually wants to do that at all or even like cares about that thing? So those were, I think, some of like those early steps. And then that just kind of, I do think that like we were talking about with small wins, like it's like dominoes where it can be a positive domino and lead to like making better and better choices that are more aligned with like a non-burned out state of myself.
How long do you feel like that took for you?
Probably so I'd say it took about 6 months of like really doing that like inner work, I guess I would define it as, before I ended up making, through that, I felt like I developed enough kind of energy and insight about what was going on to be able to like identify some of the core contributors. And so I'd say after about 6 months, then I could like make more significant changes. So I ended up like making a significant change in my job and, how I structured my schedule and things like that. But it probably took me that long to get to where I could do that. I couldn't have just like at day one of recognizing like I'm totally burned out been like, hey, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. Like I wasn't ready mentally, emotionally, financially to do that just yet. It took, time and like letting things evolve. And then even after that, which we've talked about a little bit, like there's this, you want to think that, okay, now I've made this significant or dramatic change in my life. I can just like take this deep breath and I'm totally fine. But that kind of continues to, one, for me, like those patterns can show up really easily of like overworking and, saying yes too much and all of that. So having to stay like really diligent and just recognizing like, it's like when anything is healing, it's going to take, time and space and, attention for it to like fully get back. Like, if you break your arm, you can like, function after the cast is off, but it doesn't mean that it's like as strong as it once was.
Yeah.
And so like that continues to like heal and grow.
Like I even feel like, not to throw my husband under the bus, but he's totally going to get thrown under the bus. Of like when I was in Asheville a couple weeks ago, and like the last day I was there.
Was he with you?
He was not.
Okay.
Because I like being by myself. Yeah. I like solo trips, and I like doing stuff he doesn't like to do anyway. He doesn't like to hike and do all that crap. So I'm like, this is my jam. And it was like the day I'd been there a few days, staying in my little tiny house that didn't have a TV or anything. And I got my tattoo, and I was like, just,
you did.
Yeah, I was excited. So I was feeling really good. And I talked to him on the phone, and then I came home and jumped right back into working and like put in like a 12-hour day. And it was just like, fried and just felt like just right back where I was. And he's like, I just talked to you and we were on the phone in Asheville. I just felt like, yeah, old Amanda's back, like, yay. And like, but now why you're here? But like, I don't like, dude, it's been a day, you know what I mean? And so it's like one of those things of where it's also just kind of like, yeah, you can have those moments, and it's like almost like, oh, like you see that spark again, but it's like it's not fully fixed. It's just like,
right.
And for me, I just jumped right back into the stuff that I always do, and it's learning to undo that. And how you explaining all of that to me, the example I use, just because I'm so much the weight loss brain of like, you didn't gain all of this weight in 3 weeks. You're not going to solve all of your problems in 3 weeks.
Right.
It's going to take time. It's just, we also live in an extremely impatient society. So it's just hard because it's like, well, I self-cared Sunday. How come I'm not fixed?
It's Monday now. Why?
Yeah, right.
Why do I not feel good?
I took a bath with candles.
You didn't have the ocean view, so that was what you were missing. I think, but yeah,
I think that's where the frustration comes in too. Though it's like, okay, well, I'm doing some of these things. How come? And especially when you kind of get glimmers and pieces of like, okay, I'm feeling better, and then it just like you just like don't keep living it. It's just like these glimmers of like, well, you want more of it. And like, how do I just get more of that right now? And it just doesn't happen that way.
Right.
And then it's, it's just keep, working at it instead of just being like, well, this is stupid, so I might as well just do what I've always done.
Right. Yeah. Clearly that didn't work. That retreat was totally ineffective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, not to give your husband a job, but I'll give him a job. No, but I do think that it's helpful to have people for accountability on this stuff too, like to recognize your triggers to overwork and, what that looks like for you and your patterns, and then to be able to, enlist somebody, and maybe it's not your husband, but whomever who knows you really well and can say like, Amanda, you're doing that thing again. Or like, okay, you've been working for 2 hours. Like, let's go do something.
Yeah. Put the phone down.
Right. It's helpful because I do think we naturally get into, well, one, we often, again, to get a little deeper, we tend to like find partners and relationships that'll like allow us, enable us to do these things that aren't always so adaptive. And so like there's something about that working in the in the context of a relationship, like we just kind of get used to the way that each of us do things. And so it's kind of anytime you change, kind of a core concept in like family therapy is anytime you change someone in the system or someone's trying to like practice a new way of being or new behaviors, it's going to affect the whole system. Yeah. And everybody has to really be part of that. So yeah, you can give him some homework to like pay attention to certain things. And, but I think that was really true for me, I would say, in my own journey is, I think, well, it happened, I think also because my husband was like really fed up with the way that, like just knowing that I wasn't who I am meant to be or who I am. And, being like something has to give here and I'm not going to let you off the hook about it, which, felt like really annoying and crappy in the moment, but ultimately it was really helpful.
I also relate to that.
Yeah. It's like, leave me alone. It's like, Casey, I'm stressed enough.
Yeah. And then, well, it's just like, well, is this what you want? Like, you just want to go back to your comfort zone? No.
Right. Yeah. Thanks a lot for pointing it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if somebody is hearing you and they're connecting to you and they want to come speak to you and get some, further help if they're recognizing all of this burnout, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah. So actually, Instagram is a good way at Gallia Collaborative or online at www.galliacollaborative.com is a great way to connect.
All right. And I'll make sure I put all that in the show notes and on Instagram and all that fun stuff. And again, this is another topic I feel like we could go on forever about. So
yeah, totally.
If you ever want to come back,
okay,
I'm right here overworking.
Right. Well, plenty to dig into.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
For info on health coaching and more, go to AmandaValentineBites.com.